Really appreciate that. Please stay standing for our council waiata. Brilliant. Thanks for leading us in that, Barb. Please be seated, everyone. Yeah. No mai haere mai. Welcome everyone. I'd like to especially welcome Wayne O'Donnell, Chair of Geraldine Community Board, Jan Finlayson from the Geraldine Community Board also, and I've got apologies, Anne Lemons from the Pleasant Point Community Board, and Sally Parker, who's sick today from Council. Can I have a mover for those apologies? Thank you. Councillor Gilchrist, Councillor O'Reilly. Put the motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. So we've got public forum today. So first we'll invite Chris Forth from ECAN up to speak to us.
Hello everyone, thanks for having me here. So I am Chris Firth. I'm one of the duty flow controllers for Environment Canterbury, and my sort of day job is a natural hazards advice as well. But I was asked just to come and talk a little bit about the May 2021 floods. So I'm conscious we're relatively short on time, so I'll try and rattle through a bit. But it's a big flood and not much time. So just at the end, if you've got any questions, I'm more than happy to answer anything. So we obviously had a huge amount of rain. It was one of the first red alert forecasts ever from the Met Service, and it came to fruition well and truly for us. You can see these are our sort of main catchments that were affected by the rain. I'm not going to sort of read them all out there, but the key thing to notice, this is all over a 40-hour period. The first number is the total over the whole event. The second one's the largest block of consistent heavy rain that we've got, and you can see where that really intense rain fell was to the north of the Timaru district, and that's where we got the bulk of our flooding. The two down the bottom there are interesting, not because we got a lot of rain and flooding there, but because we didn't, and that made a huge difference to what actually happened in the event. So in the Te Anawai and Pariora catchments, we got a lot less, which sort of helped us out a great deal during the flood. So the peak flows, so related to that rainfall pattern, the northern rivers are the ones that got the most flooding. So the Rari, Waihi, Temuka in the red there were sort of most affected rivers. They all have a range of sort of design or theoretical capacities on them. They're all exceeded the lower end of that range. So in some parts of the river, the floods exceeded the capacity of the river. In other parts, they have higher levels of protection when they're protecting more densely populated areas, things like that, and that didn't exceed those capacities. The next two down, the blue ones, had reasonable flows in them and caused issues. Neither of those are rated, so they don't have flood protection schemes on them. Caused reasonable amount of flooding, but not as big. And the bottom ones there are those rivers that weren't so affected. The one to mention is the Opahi at State Highway 1 wasn't a big flood, but when you got below the Temuka confluence, so from there to the mouth, it was actually quite a big flood for that river, because you had the Temuka River, the Waihi, all of those ones had got into that river by then. So what happened? The main effects we have are sort of listed here. So up in the Peel Forest area, there's the Kowhai Stream and Scottsburn streams cause significant outer river flooding, a lot of on-farm damage. One breakout from Kofi Stream, which is up by the Blandswood settlement, actually went out through Denniston Bush, the sort of reserve area there, and all the way across and almost into the Peel Forest village. It was sort of at the bottom end of the village there. The Orari River was sort of the really big one for us. We had two major breakouts. The one sort of that made the news and was the big one was on the north side, and it happened right below the gorge, and the breakout followed Cooper's Creek almost all the way down to the coast. So the whole northern side of the river essentially was flooded. That went across Route 72, State Highway 1. That's the one that shut the railway. That caused a lot of impact. Isolated houses, flooded some houses. And again, really serious on-farm damage. Another one on the other side of the river, just below the State Highway 79 bridge, which turns into Route 72. Got a breakout there, which caused a lot of on-farm damage, but was returned to the river just downstream. But I'll talk about the significance of that breakout, or sort of what didn't happen there when I show some photos in a minute. The Waihi, we had serious flooding both sides of the river, between Geraldine and Temuka, not so much in Geraldine. It held up pretty well there, but through rural land either side of the river, especially around Winchester and down towards Temuka. Temuka River, major breakout on the Arafenua side, but otherwise held up well to the flooding. So just rattling through those sort of major breakouts with some photos just to give context. So this is the Arafenua one, so it's Temuka Township. Temuka River came out at Mance Bridge there through parts of Arafenua settlement, and then crossed the highway, shut the highway there and back into the river. And that's a photo looking down from around the Mance Bridge of that breakout. The Waihi, these flooding areas, they've got to be reviewed and redone. They're very, very coarse at the moment. This is roughly where flooded. So the Orari Township, Winchester Township and Temuka Township are marked. Very important where it stops. It doesn't go to Temuka. We'll talk about that a bit later, but Winchester itself wasn't flooded, but low-lying land to the back of the town was seriously flooded. And again, a lot of flooding of farmland, damage to farmland, and isolated houses being sort of flooded or surrounded by floodwater. So this is just above Temuka. Temuka's on the top left of the shot. Those houses you can see are sort of the northern end of Temuka residential area. So this is kind of just how close it came to getting into the town there. That semicircular sort of line at the top left of the photo there is a return bank. So most of that water you can see is actually out of the Waihi River, flowed down, and that bank's picked it up and put it back in. That was a really key point for us and something we're watching all event. If that return bank there had given way or had been overtopped, we'd have water in the township. Pretty near thing. This is just a little bit further up at Te Awa Bridge. Again, the Waihi River. This bank coming in on the angle's another return bank, so that's picked up water and reduced that flooding down on that next return bank. But it has started to be overtopped, and the stop bank there is being overtopped. The water on the other side is the high Te Moana River coming in, sort of the top left of the picture, you can see there. This is Winchester Township, the Geraldine to Winchester Road. Serious flooding out here from the Waihi. That house was flooded. You might have seen the video of one of our weeks guys piggybacking someone out of there. Bridge damaged and shut. Serious flooding, but again, the town's on a higher terrace there, so the residential area itself was not flooded. Continuing to move up, this is just below Coach Road, so where that new big roundabout's going in on the Winchester Geraldine Road there. Waihi River again come out, flown down that true right side of the river, down Winchester Geraldine Road, with the farmland between the road mostly and the river, and isolated houses, water all around them. So this is that breakout on the Orari now. This is at State Highway 79 and downstream. So it's returned back into the river there, but what's important about this one is this is really quite a crucial point. If the water comes out of the top end of that more seriously, or if the return bank at the bottom there is overwhelmed, you'd end up with a situation like the other side where the water would have flown all the way to the coast, basically. If it came out of the top end there seriously, it actually goes to the west of Orari and west of Winchester. It'll join that Waihi River flooding, and that can actually get to Temuka. And that's what happened in the 1945 flood. If you've ever seen photos of Temuka with sort of 1/2 metre water down the main street, that's what happened in the 1945 flood, a breakout at this point here. So it's a really crucial point. So we had overflow there, but it didn't develop into something worse. And that's our major breakout on the north side. So coming out right up by the gorge, followed Cooper's Creek, which was already flooding in and of itself. The Ko-Fi stream in Scottsburn that I talked about earlier actually formed Cooper's Creek. So those were already in big flood. Cooper's Creek was in big flood. And then we had the Orari come down and into that area. That's actually designed to happen, not in the way it did here, but in partly the way it did here in really large floods as a release valve for the other side of the river, so that water doesn't go towards the built up residential areas that are on the other side. But what happened in this flood is it came out a lot higher than we would have hoped. Where it comes out and sort of the design situation is lower than it would have, sort of just below State Highway 79 there, and then it follows Cooper's Creek down. And like I say, that's something we anticipate to happen to relieve pressure on the other side, but it just did it a lot higher than we would have hoped it would. So this is the breakout at the top end of the Orari. The river's a lot further into the far paddock than it would have been at the start of the event. You can see the river berm there, and you can see just the stop bank on the landward side of those trees and that. There's kilometres of stop bank lost here, or more than a kilometre. It would have initially breached and just been a small breach, but as the flows dropped away and the river just turned more and more into that area, just scoured the stop bank away, all the way down basically as the flow was receding. It just scoured more and more of that stop bank away. That's just a view from the other angle where it's come through there. You can see the big build-up of gravel. That's what's happened as the flows dropped away. All of that gravel's fallen out of the river, which turns the flow sideways. And it's that lateral movement of the flow in the river that's just gone straight through the stop bank and out. And that's what the major sort of repair works have been post-flood, is trying to get those channels pointing back down the river and not at an angle to the banks, because you could build a new stop bank there, but if the channels are still pointing at it, they'll just go straight through it again the next time there's a flood. So it's really this build-up of gravel and the sort of meandering pattern of the river that is going to cause breakouts there going forward. This is coming downstream now from that breakout. We're just moving towards the coast. So this is Silverton Road. This one here is Pitt Road. This one made the papers for the size of the scour hole. I think the scour hole is the one sort of in the middle left of the photo there. The Orari flows and the Cooper's Creek flows, which is the creek in the bottom right there. They've overflown, they've scoured the ground and put a sort of 2.5 metre hole in the ground. Right in the middle of the photo towards the bottom, there's another big round semicircle, and that's another big hole in the paddock that's been scoured out by the flood water. So really serious damage through this particular area here. This is Farm Road, further downstream again. Cooper's Creek's over sort of where those trees are at the top left. This is notable because in all previous investigations and everything we've had for flooding, we didn't anticipate water being there, or that much of it for sure. So this is something new that we've sort of discovered and learned from this event. Floods can surprise. So we're re-looking at the modelling for this and the information we have for this whole area, because this particular part of this breakout is something we didn't really anticipate. And this is right at the bottom end of Cooper's Creek. The stop bank you can see to the right of the shot there is on the sort of landward furthest from the river of Cooper's Creek, and this is where Cooper's Creek comes back into the Orari. That bank again held up pretty well. It did get overtopped, but not in a serious way, which is really important because that water would have otherwise ended up around Clandyboy. Clandyboy had a lot of water around it from local runoff and smaller creeks and things, but it didn't get the main Orari breakout because this bank sort of kept it away. And I don't have any photos of this area, unfortunately. It clagged in and we couldn't get up there, but this is just very roughly at the bottom middle there is the top of that Orari breakout, and these are the Scottsburn stream, Ko-Fi stream ones that I've talked about, and the water going towards Beale Forest, just so you know that area that was flooded. So what didn't happen, I think there's almost as much of a story of what did happen. So despite the extreme rainfall at Blandswood, the settlement there was unscathed. That's an area where you can have sort of houses destroyed. It's a very vulnerable location, so we were quite fortunate there that things sort of held up reasonably well in terms of that township. And the rain there is just absolutely off the sort of charts in terms of, you look at the return period of that rain. I need someone to have a good look at it for me, but it was very, very, very high rainfall. Temuka Township remained clear of the river flooding. That's a really big one. The Orari, Waihi and Temuka can all flood Temuka, and they were all at or very near their capacities and held up. So while we had serious flooding, and I don't want to diminish that for anyone who was flooded, because it's very serious, but it could have been a heck of a lot worse. The lower Opahi River didn't reach really high flows, which meant some usual candidates for flooding, like the Levels Plains and the hut communities along the Opahi, were relatively safe. The Te Anawai and Apua River, and I've put sort of there because there's a bit of a story for that we'll tell in a second, they didn't get up to too high flows, which really took a lot of pressure off the lower Opahi River, which is where the Levels Plains, the hut communities and things would have been under threat. And the smaller coastal stream catchments, whilst there was a big rain for them, they didn't really cause us too many troubles. The Washtai Creeks, Taitarakiki in town here, Saltwater Creek, they weren't as bad as they have been on other occasions. So why wasn't it worse? I put there, we don't know how lucky we are. And again, I don't want to diminish the flooding that was anticipated, but in the lead up to this, all we were talking about was how dry it was, and that was just a huge factor. If you'd put this rain event on top of sort of average rainfall conditions for the rest of the year, it would have been a heck of a lot worse. If you put it on sort of wet antecedent conditions, it would have been sort of Armageddon almost. The fact that it was dry, made a huge difference to what eventuated, because that first sort of 100 mils of the rain, maybe, or something that vicinity sort of soaked into the ground and didn't go anywhere. Lake Apua was very, very low. It rose 11.5 meters roughly, and it didn't spill any water except for what they were trying to get rid of deliberately, which is only a very small amount from that dam. They're not able to get rid of a huge amount of water. But it carried everything that went into it. And to put that into context, looking at the flows and the inflows to the lakes, the Apua would have been the river with the highest return period flow in it quite comfortably, I think, had the water got into the river. But the lake was able to hold it because it was so incredibly low at the start of the event. So that took a lot of pressure off the Apua River, obviously, but then the lower Opahi, it just makes a huge difference down there. The rain stayed north. So the southern tributaries are mostly talking about the Te Anawai River, but they weren't overly affected. You would have only had to have shifted that rain 20, 25, 30 K, something like that, south. And then suddenly those rivers are involved. And then again, they're additional contributors to what's happening in the Opahi. And Pleasant Point comes into the mix and all that sort of thing. So we're very fortunate that the initial forecasts had rain coming a lot further south, but as the event developed, they were adjusted and the rain stayed in the northern part of the district, which sort of saved us a lot. It was a winter flood. I don't think it made a huge difference in this one because the freezing level was so sort of remarkably high for the end of May, but colder temperatures and winter conditions tend to not produce the same size floods in South Canterbury. We have our worst floods in kind of February, March, that sort of time, when it's warmer air, generally higher rainfall intensities and stuff. And the key rivers held at or very near capacity. And that sounds like a silly thing to say, why wasn't it worse? But for whatever reason, the amount of rain and runoff we ended up with was right at the capacity of some of our key rivers, the Orari, the Temuka, the Waihi. And I've said a few more hours rain there, and it really is that if you'd had 3-4 hours more of the highest intensity rain, or those higher intensities have been a few mils more than they were, that could have been the difference between those rivers sort of flooding the rural areas but hanging on around the towns, and that, or them sort of having events that would supersede the whole scheme and go everywhere. So it's pretty near run thing. So what is on the horizon going forward? And I've put sort of tongue in cheek there, what isn't, because it seems like just about everything's going wrong at the moment. But the Orari Waihi rivers, so they were our worst affected in terms of damage in the river system. When I say damage, I'm talking to parts of the flood protection scheme, so stop banks, but also, and really importantly, the vegetated berm areas, which are crucial to keeping the water in the river and keeping it off the stop banks. They'll be vulnerable to high flows for years now. And while you can throw heaps of money in and build stop banks, like I say, you can't actually really make trees grow faster, and it's going to be a long, long time till we have sort of the established berm areas that we had previously. And the other thing is the gravel distribution through those rivers. Up until that flood, our works guys would have a pretty good understanding of where gravel was, where channels were, what they needed to try and keep an eye on, and that. And now all of those sort of conditions have changed, and now the river wants to do other things. It wants to go into other places. It's pointing at different parts of the river bank. It's and they'll be dealing with that sort of movement of gravel through the system and what it means for different parts of the river for years, if not decades. Bruce Scarlett, who used to work for us, I remember him saying maybe like 10 years ago, not long after I started, that they were still dealing with gravel from the 86 flood. So, that was 20, 25 years later sort of thing. So that's sort of what we could probably expect in the Orari, and they'll be looking at that in Ashburton certainly for a long time now. And I just thought I'd add at the end there, it's not just the May 2021 flood we're dealing with recently. So we all know about the Rangitata from 2019, but it's still in a sensitive state, still vulnerable. And repair works in that river have been slowed because we have had multiple sort of moderate floods that are just undoing stuff they're doing in the river and they're having to redo it. So it's just to keep in the back of your minds that that's still there. And the other one is the sea decided to sort of join in the fun about a month after the May flood, and actually there was a decent swell event that caused some inundation through the district. So the South Rangitata huts had some seawater in them and that into that settlement. There was private stop bank damage, and one stop bank probably irreparably damaged to the north of the Opahi, and another one over top to the south of the Opahi. And there was damage and debris on the railway line. So just another thing there. So really the sea, the Orari, the Waihi and the Rangitata are all going to be on the radar for a few years to come. And that's north of the Opahi, the sea, where it's come over there. Sand and salt water and debris, rubbish on someone's paddock. But that's the end of my talk.
Thanks, Chris. So any good news?
Not really, not at the moment.
No, that's all right.
No, we won't be out of a job anyway.
No, we appreciate the work and the relationship over these events, but there's a lot of work and a lot of funding issues sitting in behind this as well. So there's a lot of work being done with NEMA, ECAN, Mural Forum and lots of other agencies, etc., to help find a longer term solution. However, we are going to be vulnerable for some time, aren't we? So yeah, real risk. Any questions on floods for Chris? Councillor Booth.
You mentioned about the shingle control. So what does that involve? Is that like moving it around or removal, or what
well, it could be a range of things. The initial work they'll be doing is sort of bulldozer work to try and straighten up channels and things that where there's a big slug of gravel turning a channel towards the bank. So like I say, until they do that, every time you get an elevated flow, it's just going to point to the bank and it'll go through it without the protection of the trees and things that were there before. So there's sort of that initial thing, but there could be long-term management required in terms of, we know now there's a whole lot of gravel in a part of the river we don't want it. For example, they might be wanting to try and target gravel extractors to use it, but it has to be in an area where they see the benefit in getting it from there. If they don't, then you're looking at potentially having to try and fund removal from rainy district, that sort of thing. So but it was more to, I don't know what the exact sort of solutions there are. It's more that the understanding of the river now will have changed completely, and the dynamics of it in terms of where the channels are flowing and where the river kind of wants to go will have changed. And it's just, there'll be a whole process of sort of understanding that change and adapting the work that they're doing to sort of match what the river's doing now, whereas they would have had a reasonable understanding pre this flood what was going on. That was sort of more the point I was trying to get to.
So do you sort of encourage gravel users to take shingle out of the river beds or not?
Well, they have done historically, yeah. It totally depends on the river and the situation, and yeah, whether it's valued. In some rivers you don't want it out because the beds are too low. You know, it could go both ways. If the bed's too low, you're more prone to the sort of lateral erosion within the. So there's always a balance there, but yeah, it has been a method used historically. Yeah.
Yeah, it comes down to cost of transport though, all of the time, isn't it?
There has to be a financial sort of
Yes.
something in it for the contractors, otherwise you have to sort of pay to do it yourself via the schemes.
Yeah. Councillor O'Reilly.
Yeah, thank you. I'd just like to, congratulate ECAN and probably the catchment boards on their planning, by speaking on behalf of Temuka, because it was the work that was done in previous years that actually save our town. So, we know how close it was, and but the forward planning about that. So hopefully it'll scheme will go back in again and the banks get a little bit higher and we'll keep us safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor O'Reilly. Any other questions? All good? Hey, thanks, Chris. Appreciate you taking the time. It's really important that everyone's informed on that information. Yeah, we wish we were working with you on other more positive things, but that's right. It always seems to be flooded, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm always the bearer of bad news.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ready, public forum now. We've got Genya and Carol, if you'd like to both come up. Welcome, ladies, and just floor is yours.
Right. Mayor and councillors, thank you for accommodating me. I think this is the third time in 12 months. I don't really want to make a habit of this, but I think we're making progress and now is the time, certainly. 4 weeks ago today, I was sitting on the first day of a grey power conference in Nelson for all of the country. But it wasn't until the Thursday, the third morning, the last morning, that a motion was passed from the floor for asking the Grey Power Federation Board to make representations to the Minister and relevant local authorities, in particular to local authorities to request that they investigate all and any fair equitable methods that can be taken to impose restrictions on current and future governments to prevent the future privatisations of these assets in perpetuity. I guess you'll get a formal letter from us locally on behalf of that. But it's interesting that we then hear later in the day that there was fun and games going on in Blenheim with announcements on the Three Waters. The Three Water infrastructural assets, as we've said before, and we all know, they've been bought and paid for by successive generations in this area of users and ratepayers. And the conversation on change and improvement is one between you and us. You are the representatives we vote for and who we pay to carry out our approved wishes, which is done in the annual planning and the long-term planning process. We require you to follow required protocols to consult widely with referendums or whatever it takes for you to understand our wishes for the future. So today I call for that to be happen, that we start the conversation. So we need to understand that we need to be consulted. We need to have information, good, valuable information on the Three Waters. You've just done your 10-year plan, and as I asked when I presented at that, I asked that, can we see that with the Three Waters information taken out and presented separately? Now, I know you've been given a model from the WICS, from the Water Industry Commission for Scotland, but when I look at the second line on that, when they have the revenue on the first line and then the assumed revenue from households at 70%. And I'll read the detail. New Zealand-wide assumption based on the observed split in Great Britain. How relevant is that model? So we need to understand what our actual figures are from what are our rates and charges in the current year and the 10 years to 2013. The actual and projected asset replacement and maintenance costs over that period. You've done the work. Let's have it and see it in some detail. the district council cost and means of financing prudent infrastructure upgrades. And then it would be quite fun to see the Wix model information put in according to what they say and see where the government has got their projected dollars for the associated group of councils that Timaru District Council falls into. We want to have an indication for the proposed changes of layers of additional levels of administration and the likely costs. Creating 4 new service providers isn't going to come cheaply. What's the loss of our democratic influence on those? That for us that pay the bills in the end, whoever the bill comes from, and the loss of accountability to that same source of funds from new service providers. The fairness of the proposed asset values loss on the TDC financials and the appearance of that asset value on outsized service funders. As I understand, you're going to lose the asset value, they're going to get it so that they can borrow money against it. You know, if I tried to do that to another, but you still own it. But if I tried to do that as a private company, I think I'd be done for extortion. And I think this government should be too. The challenge to the resilience of smaller community schemes, and I think of the Halden line situation in our area when the electricity changes happened. The Halden line was the one that the government put in the legislation that no community that is on a network can be disadvantaged. They can't be disconnected, however uneconomic that line is. And it was always the Halden line down here. And you know, what happens to the people up the Halden line that are on water schemes? The protection of the right to access to safe water for all consumers, wherever those consumers live, will it eventually become uneconomic to provide schemes in certain areas? So they'll close those schemes off and people will not have access to adequate water. The protection of the rights, the checks to protect the water contamination from privately added water assets are not held the responsibility of the provider. The infrastructure, when the government has failed to regulate the quality of attachments to the community water schemes. I don't know how many of you would have seen that article, I think it was on a Sunday program, that showed that we're getting lead contamination in our houses because the taps that are being brought in, allowed to come in, aren't being regulated, aren't being monitored. And so you can have all this high, perfectly wonderful water infrastructure in place, and then they just go you can go add anything onto the end of it and get lead poisoning anyway. I think it's time to consider the discussion of a local trust to own the infrastructural assets along the lines of the consumer trusts and the electricity distribution system. The system could be improved to the point where governments and councils will not be able to sell ratepayer funded assets. The previous council understands how we feel about our infrastructure assets when the previous council tried to considered selling the Alpine shares. Well, this is water. And this is even more essential to us than our electricity, although that's pretty essential these days. Asset ownership does not need to move for cooperative economising service provision to create sustainable and resilient communities, essential services. The government could provide the means of upgrading our assets and so on at a competitive price by sourcing them in total at a government level and having that cheaper economy purchasing power available to all the councils to earn from. The sort of model they're suggesting is completely changing the way that we are looking at managing our assets and have managed our assets quite successfully. I was very proud to get up and speak to that motion at the conference to say, and I'm from Timaru, in the last 2 years, we've had the best water in New Zealand, and I think we might know a bit of how to do it down in our way. So all the great power New Zealand knows about our wonderful water now. And then we start seeing the discussion, which is opening up, as you've all seen and heard. And, you know, you have to laugh or you can be offended. The line, undies can still be togs. Well, actually, our standards in South Canterbury are higher than that. You can't wear your undies at sea bay. I checked this afternoon. So that to me is kindergarten level. But we're the adults in this conversation. Your residents and ratepayers and you, our representatives. And it's time we started a conversation with public meetings, with referendums, with whatever it takes to support you and start holding fast that these assets are ours. You are managing very well with them. Thank you. We thank you for that. And we would like you to continue to do that. And the other conversation, they actually don't have any rights to have our assets, and they should be told, butt out. So that's mine.
Right. Okay, so I'd just like to thank the Mayor and councillors for the stance we've seen so far, because it is extremely concerning. I've got a list of concerns and I probably could have carried on and adding to it. So these aren't necessarily in order of importance, but basically loss of control over our water supply. So you guys are accountable to ratepayers, residents, but this governing body, from what I understand, you elect someone to go on a board to elect somebody else. So we've got absolutely no control or say in what would happen. And there's also the fact that iwi, you'd have to have a 75% agreement in the vote. So if iwi doesn't want to pass something, it won't happen, which is also a big concern. So loss of control over our future costs, we don't know what this is going to cost us. At the moment, we have a fixed rate and we just have no idea what that is going to be. I think Bruce Smith has forecast about $1,000 increase in Westland or something like that, so not cheap. As Jania said, it's based on a model for Scotland, so they've got a different climate, they've got a larger population in a smaller area, and I just don't see how that translates to New Zealand, where we know from north to south, we're just completely different. The democratic process or lack of it, if we were being kind like Jacinda, we would say it was an incentive that they're giving councils. I would call it a bribe. They're threatening if councils don't join, from my understanding, that they will put up your costs for implementing things and raising standards that you have to meet and all that sort of thing. So again, that's a huge concern. Also, the change of law, that's a possibility that councils won't have to consult with ratepayers over that. So to me, that is just completely destroying our democratic process. And we've had a precedent of that with Maori wards, where the government has just completely overridden people being able to have their say on it. So the other concern, would we realise the benefits that the government's promising? Money generally tends to go to big population centres, so we kind of know from the past too that we can definitely miss out on that money here. So track record on promises, there's a lot of talk, there's not a lot of delivery. The DHB, we've just heard that their costs are blown out completely and they're employing 3 times as many bureaucrats to do the job. So it's just not looking good for them sort of centralising our water supply. So I'm also calling for public consultation, if necessary a referendum. We would love to see our councillors standing firm and working with other councils against this, because basically it's an asset grab, it's theft. So, and my feeling from discussing with people around the community, those who are aware of what's going on, and this is fairly recent for me, I wasn't even sort of on the radar when the long-term plan came around, that nobody is keen. So I think we do need to find out what the feeling is once people have got the facts, and not these facts. We want real facts and information. So a group of us are looking at setting up not a ratepayers, a residents group, I guess, which we're calling our District Our Water. So we're in the process of setting up a Facebook page, getting information out to people, so that we can do our part as well. We can reach quite a few people, a lot of people, I think, given we've got about 100 and something on our email list. We should be able to get that information out. And just do anything we can to support the council. So we're thinking down at the market, public meetings, anything like that where you can get people along to talk about it. And I know you guys haven't got the information, but as soon as you do, it would be fantastic to be kept informed. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a fascinating one. So stick around, because we will be discussing later on. Some more around Three Waters and sort of process from council around here. And yeah, the biggest challenge, I think, at the nail on the head right at the end there is the information sort of being filter fed, if you like, through a very good microfiltration plant. It's a pretty good dad joke, isn't it? A water joke, Councillor Burt. You like that? Yeah. Yeah, stick around and we might be able to help answer your questions. But yeah, we certainly support, the fact that you're, challenging the information. And I guess one of the key things for us is that we can go to the public and have full and factual information to present to them. And just one thing, I guess, with Mayor Bruce on the coast, great video, but some of the things he did mix up the numbers, so it probably wasn't a good portrayal as far as around the numbers. So, but we're really keen to get all facts out there, so you can understand what that means for you and the entire district. Councillor Burt.
Yeah, without going down a rabbit hole, I was just wondering, what's your opinion in terms of or is there some coalition between the repeal of the RMA and the government's need to look at how it basically deals with local government? Have you got a view on that?
Well, yes, I mean, but they're also reviewing local government anyway, so I don't know that, by 2024, when the bribe money might actually is supposed to eventuate. So it's hardly a bribe when you don't get it, and if they're not even there at that stage, you might not get it either. So don't rely on that. I think that there's, my husband actually said to me, how do the water services, when you've got 4 big water services and you're trying to do planning in district councils and so on, how does that work? They can't put the same water service type conditions and so on across. It's a bit of a dog's breakfast. I think that they're almost starting to come like the clowns in the circus, where they throw all the balls in the air, and some of them are going to fall over. In fact, quite a lot of them will, and it may not happen a bit sooner than they think. And I think that you have got well over 150 years of background experience in developing their services for the people that they service. We have trusted you to look after them for us and to manage them for us, and certainly we can be proud of what we've got in Timaru with that crown of best water in New Zealand. But I think that we have to realise we can't get blood out of a stone. That 250 billion bribe comes out of our taxpayer money, and it's going to be given to us to take our assets away. And we're going to have to pay an awful lot more, both to the councils and to the service provider or whatever have you. Now, we can't afford to do both. I would prefer to pay them the money and see that it's done here, and tell the government to get on with what they need to do with their money. They've got plenty of things that they need to do with the money that they're getting. So leave the district council should be left to do. It's developed this way over the century and a half or what have you. We've been, I think it was 1860s down here that we started in here. We've developed these schemes and so on because it's catchment based, it's population relevant, but it's catchment based, and that's where the management and the responsibility should be for. We meet you in your places of work and so on, so you know that we're kind of keeping our fingers on what's going on. We've left it to you pretty much for quite a while now, and it's worked. Why are we just throwing out the bath with the baby with the bath water?
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, team? That's great. Thanks, ladies, and we'll pick up on that in a little bit later on.
Summary of those points.
Yeah. Thank you. Righty, move back to the agenda now, team. Any identification of urgent business? No. Minor nature. Councillor Booth. Perfect. Sounds good. Everyone comfortable with that? I'll put a motion. So you set it first. I'll second that. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. So we'll put that in minor nature at the end. Thank you. Move now to conflicts of interest. Got any conflicts of interest? No. Go to confirmation of minutes. Just please check that you were there. 7.1 minutes of council meeting, 29th of June. Can I have a mover? Councillor Gilchrist, Councillor Riley. Motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. 7.2, minutes of tenders and procurement meeting on the 29th. I will be there. I'll move. Councillor Burt. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Now 7.3, minutes of council meeting on the 14th of July. So moved. Thank you. Councillor Burt, Councillor Gilchrist. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Minutes of council meeting 20th of July. There's a way for that. Councillor Wills, Councillor Oliver, helped with that. Thank you. Put the motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye. Yes. Aye. Yes.
Yes, I just want to rectify there's a mistake in the court documents. The vote on resolution for council issue that we have the issue rather than ordinance and discuss public eyes in favour of it. It was recorded at 2 that type of here and it says I was actually against it. So I just want to rectify.
Yep, cool, noted. You're all good, mate. Thank you. Otherwise, comfortable with that amendment. Councillor Wills, thank you. Councillor Gilchrist, all those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Now to 7.5, tenders committee meeting held on 27th. Yes, Councillor Gilchrist, Councillor Burt, thank you. All those in favour, please say aye. It's carried. Now go to schedules of functions attended. 8.1. I'm happy to move that. Mayor, thank you. Councillor Wills, put the motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye. Carried. 8.2, schedules of functions is attended by Chief Executive, Councillor Lyon. Happy to move that. Thank you, Councillor Booth. Thank you. Put the motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Let's catch up on my agenda. Now to 42, so we move to 9.1, fixing of the common seal. Any questions? So moved. Thank you, Councillor Wills. Councillor Riley. Just half a nod. Motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Contracts led by Tenders and Procurement Committee, 47. Comfortable with that? Councillor Gilchrist, thank you. I'm happy to second that. Put the motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. You're good, mate. Not moving too fast. No. Now we go to our delegation manual and invite Erica to speak to us. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. But just highlighting, the report is asking for the approval for delegations for the chief executive. Also approving the removal of the delegations for the committees and subcommittees, as that was done previously in another council meeting. The delegations manual, just to kind of highlight that, is a record of delegations to the CE and the sub-delegations to staff. It's actually quite an important document, the fact of actually enabling yourselves to ensure that the business is getting done and staff are able to efficiently and effectively enact the goals and objectives in your governance direction. What we're looking to do is move this format into much more of a living document where it gets updated regularly. Point in fact of that note is I wrote this report in June. The date actually on there is August in the delegations manual. So please do note that as it actually is the August delegations manual. The other thing to point out is there are certain powers that councillors as yourself need to retain, which are indicated in this report as well. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Eric. Any questions? Yeah, Jan. Oh, sorry.
How was the Official Information Act treated in the delegations?
Yeah.
So we operate under what is called the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act 1987, which is really a parallel version of the Official Information Act, which is the central government one to which I think you're referring. And so what that does is it regulates the meetings in regard to, so it has two functions. It regulates the order and conduct of meetings and so on, but or sets the statutory parameters around them. And the other part is it also has provisions around the disclosure of information and information which we hold in our capacity as council. And so what we have therefore, so all information, the presumption is available, and then there are restrictions on that, whether it relates to the privacy of individuals or it may be commercially sensitive. But we have internal processes which then regulate who may access information and who then may release that information.
Codifies OIA stuff, provisions for local government situations.
True, yes, so it what sets rather than codify, it sets a statutory test that says all information we hold should be available, and then says there are limits or exclusions based on a reasonably tightly defined criteria. So that's how that interrelates with it. And then within our delegations, there are certain people who may authorise the release of certain information.
Cool, thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Booth.
Is it more perhaps pertinent to talk about what we are allowed to do rather than what we've delegated? You said mention there 3 point, where was it? 32 in your report.
What are you referring to?
Sorry, just clarify that, where are you focusing?
Just looking in your report about what's excluded from the delegation that can't be passed on to the chief executive.
So if you look in the delegation manual under 1.2, there's the legal authority and reserved powers to council. It's on page 10. It's in the appendix, page 13. So that these are
Page 13 in the report.
no, it's in the actual in the manual itself. So there are things like the power to make a rate, make a bylaw, power to borrow money or purchase or dispose of assets, power to adopt a long-term plan, annual report, and there's a list to appoint the chief executive, and there's a few others.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
If you look through you, your worship, if you look at a lot of the actual delegations relate to us implementing matters through statutory provisions, and there's a plethora of them, whether it's the Building Act, the RMA Act, just looking at them, there's something under the Summary Proceedings Act here, the Telecommunications Act, and so on. So there's just a lot of it is actually how we do our day-to-day work. But because we're a statutory body, every single person must actually have the authority to go and do what they're doing, and that's what we set out to do. And what we've done here, when you look at it, is the documents had quite a refresh in that we want to keep it current and live because legislation will change, whether it's the Dog Control Act, they may change it. We then have to make sure that we update our delegations so that officers can carry on doing their functions. But really, I suppose it's the really high level and important stuff, such as setting rates and bylaws that are reserved, and council cannot delegate those functions.
Thank you. Any further questions? Cool. Let's see. Yeah. So we've got recommendations 1 through 5. Comfortable move. Councillor Wills, seconder for that. Yeah, Councillor Burt. Thank you. Put the motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. And risk management framework. Welcome, Eric. Oh, sorry, welcome, Ernest, with you. Apologies.
Go ahead, I'll take the report as read, but I'll let Ernest just provide a little context.
Yeah, good afternoon, your worship and councillors. So in the late 2019, we engaged a consultant to do a review on the risk management practices of GDC. And out of that, they came up with some recommendations. And out of the recommendations, the Audit and Risk Committee approved them. And so we went to work and we then updated the risk management policy and we drafted out a risk management framework that was endorsed by the Audit and Risk Committee. And the endorsement, they recommended that it was probably passed through to the council for adoption. So, yeah, I'm happy to take any questions.
Cool, any questions? No, comfortable with that. Okay, cool. I'm happy to move that. Councillor Gilchrist, put the motion to the floor. Those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much. Yeah, to that as well. You got you. Yeah. Welcome, Mr. Harper.
Thank you, Your Worship. We're talking about item that's now on page 106. Recommendations to do with the Arari Temuka OP Perrier Water Zone Committee and so on. Report taken as read, prepared by ECAN. Unfortunately, that I have to be here to see this through with institutional knowledge, but it's one of those things that we need to progress. We're last cab off the rank, but it is fundamentally important to the direction of travel for the OTOP committee, and I would happy to take questions. But I guess before we do that, it has come out of the last 2 years review. Former staff member Tracy Tierney was involved in Fit for the Future 2025 and 2030 goals for the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, and it's all coming through in work programs. And this letter of shared priorities acknowledges what Council's LTP contains and what we will do. And we are in a position to do those things because it's, we're far enough through the planning process for that.
It's cool. We do have Janine here as well from ECAN, so we might just invite her up just to add anything to that. Thanks, gents. Sorry, apologies for not getting up sooner. Did you want to move the microphone just slightly that way? Thanks, Mr. Harper. Welcome, Janine.
Thank you. I'll just introduce myself for those who don't know me. So my name is Janine Roux. I facilitate the OTOP Zone Committee and have been working quite closely with them around this process. And as it has been touched on, what we're trying to confirm is the new terms of reference that has been through all the councils. And as part of that terms of reference, there was an expectation that district councils or territorial authorities will have a letter of shared priority to each of the zone committees in their district, outlining their expectations or their priorities that they'd like the zone committees to focus on. So that's what we bring to you today.
Cool, fantastic. Thanks, Janine. Questions? Councillor Gilchrist, thanks.
It's not a question, but I hope I'll get away with it anyway. It's just a comment to say that we've just had a refresh of our members and probably had the most effective workshop for the last couple of years last week, and so we're really looking forward to having this letter of shared priorities signed, finalised, so that we can actually get on with the good work that we're planning to do. Thanks.
And Your Worship, that reflects on the next report, which is refreshing the committee to go with that.
Yes.
And new appointees, and that should just follow on as a matter of course, really.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, look, and I just echo your points around that. Was a great process. It was fantastic and great to see some really cool people keen to be involved in that. So any other questions on specifically to this report? Comfortable with that? So Councillor Gilchrist, do you want to move that? Yeah, cool. 1, 2, 3. Any other questions? No. Seconder, Councillor Riley, thank you. Put the motion to the floor. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. So we're now going to just break because we've got minor nature, and then we're going to come back to that second item. Yeah, so we'll get you back shortly. So we've got no urgent business, but sorry, yes, Mr. Harper, if you could say that'd be great. Thank you. Yeah, no, it's fine. So we're considering the minor nature item that's Councillor Booth brought up, but might ask Mr. Harper. Mr. Harper, sorry, to give us an update, and then we can just talk around the process from here and what we're looking to plan to do. Thank you, Mr. Harper.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, there is, as you know, a lot of information starting to be published in the space, and there is information and documents coming out of Wellington every few days. What we have done is we've looked carefully at the 2 or 3 page document that came out about what we should be doing in the next 8 weeks. And the 8 weeks is a time for us to make submissions on the reform process. It is clearly stated that it is not a time to make a final decision. That comes a bit later. To be more informed than we currently are, we have looked, and by we, I'm talking about the Chief Executive and staff, have looked at the options for getting some more investigation work done to confirm or not our thinking on what has been prepared for us by others. And we have done a phone interview and assessment, and this morning we've appointed a consultant to do a piece of work for us involving reviewing 3 parts, reviewing as a whole, and Timaru in particular, why we should be matched with the Scottish and English scenarios. The second piece of work is trying to figure out how the amalgamated entities will achieve these 50% OPEX and CAPEX savings, because that just seems to be wild thinking. And thirdly, it is figuring out as a standalone authority what in fact the implications are for the next 30 years, and whether the contention that DIA through Wix are saying that we'll have a 3 or 4 or 5 times multiplier on our costs and therefore our recoveries has in fact got any valid base. So that work has been commissioned, and we are expecting to have a Zoom meeting / workshop with councillors and the consultant on next meeting day, 31 August, when this will be progressed by then. And shortly thereafter, get a final report, depending on what comes through in the workshop scenario. So we're doing that. We've also spoken to our comms man, Stephen, who is preparing his thoughts, and we briefed him, we spoke to him yesterday, and then we briefed him again this morning for him to get his thoughts together on how he might start doing more communication with our community. And this is not about persuading the community or seeking feedback by a special consultant, because that will come later once we have full information. But it is having a conversation of some sort and actually engaging further. And it kind of covers the comments made in the public forum earlier this afternoon. We've got those items in terms of the conversation, further analysis, what it means for Timaru. We've got that work in hand, and we will be in a position to make some submission as the government have asked for by the end of September. We're in a good position to do that, and it's work on foot. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, cool. And so, I mean, one of the things, one of the concerns, I guess, of this process, and both myself and other mayors have concerns that this 8 week, at the end of this 8 weeks, it's, there may be a decision. So there isn't a chance after that to then take it to your community. And that's a real concern across many councils, that we're not going to be in the position to, and that we need to be in effectively in a position or state a position prior to that. So just a conversation with the Chief Executive, and this is a similar process that Waimakariri are running, was that yes, they've got a company, I'm not sure if it's the same one, doing that work to check the facts, but also the process would be, and we haven't had discussion around this yet, but so that information comes back to us at the end of August, and then by mid-September we'd be in the position to have a lot of information to take to our community. So and maybe it's not the full information, but enough to, because there's a lot of interest, I think, to the ladies' points, in this, and we need to give them the factual information to date. And when I say factual, I mean all facts, just not the facts that might represent
Robust.
Yeah, totally our own case. And so that's the WICS, the Becker, all that, the Castalia report that sits in with local government New Zealand. So the plan at this stage and hasn't been signed off by council because we're only discussing it now, but would be to do public meetings in the middle of September, the first couple of weeks, once we've got that information, and also go out with as much information as we can direct to ratepayers prior to that, so they're informed prior to those public meetings, and then we would be in a position later in September to be well informed on what the ratepayers and the residents of the community think to that point, because we're going to be able to garner that through feedback in these public meetings as well. But we are very conscious that we want to have as much information at that point that we can actually provide full facts to them, but to the people. But there is a real concern amongst mayors that this is just going to be mandated. So I, as the mayor, would like to be in a position with this council prior to that end of September that we have a pathway in line, which is our preferred position. And I know that we do have a default position now, which is status quo, but I'd also like to have that conversation with the community on what they think. So we'll go now to questions, and we'll accept comments on this as well. Councillor Piddington.
Look, it's a shame the government's kind of steamrolled local democracy over on this one. Everything else we have to consult over this. My question really is, why not hold a local referendum? I mean, the timeframes they put in front of us, we're never going to be able to get public feedback. And I guess people are aware, either believe or don't believe the information from single narrative. If we had a by-election, how long would it take? Any idea be the time frame to get a feeling? Because we might have really good information at the end of 6 weeks, but then only have 2 weeks to test it with the public. I think most people already have a position.
Oh, no, totally agree. And that's my concern, as Mark's just said, and Mark is also our electoral officer, so runs this for us. So 3 months, is the time span that you need. So we don't actually have time to have a referendum on this. The problem is we could be aiming for a referendum, and we just don't know at what point a government is going to make a decision to mandate or not, or to give us more time. Perhaps they'll just come and say, hey, look, you now in the position to consult with the community, but I doubt that's going to happen. So I don't think we're going to be in a position to be able to do that.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. Just an idea.
I'll go to Councillor Booth, and then I'll go to Wayne from Jordan Community Board. Councillor Booth.
Yeah, look, I'm quite concerned. I mean, at the end of the day, we're talking about $1 billion worth of assets paid for by a ratepayer.
Yeah, $500 million.
$500 million. Yeah. $500 million. They're talking about taking away from the people of South Canterbury who have paid for it. They are offering, they're saying it's not worth anything. They're going to take the debt, which is 50 million, 60 million, 57, something like that. They're going to give us 20 million back for some reason. And then they're going to triple, possibly, our water rates. And first thing they'll do is they'll probably put meters on, meter everything. I just had a look at what our usage is compared to, say, Selwyn and Waimak. Selwyn's 7 million cube or hectolitres, whatever you call it, per annum. We're 11.4. Waimak is 7 as well. So if we were to be putting that onto water meters, we're going to be paying a lot more than that. A lot more of our money is going to go somewhere else. So we may have some big commercial users in there. That may be why that figure's like that. The other problem I've got is our revenue is 22 million. Our OPEX is around about just under 11, and therefore we have a surplus of 11 going towards other stuff within our council. that's going to leave a massive hole. Sure, there's some costs involved around paying for things, but that's something that we need, that 20 million isn't going to go far. So, and that's to help, that's considering the overheads of running a council the size we are. So there's so many questions. The other problem I've got is when looking at the number 4 or the South Island, the debt to revenue ratio for Christchurch is 5.47. For the rest of the South Island, it's 1.66, which means that we're actually been doing our job quite nicely. But actually, when we get bundled up with Christchurch, that number's, we're going to be paying for their debt, right? And the main reason for this is around trying to consolidate the entities and get some mass. They're going to borrow $1.5 billion directly straight away to give us some money back to make us feel better. That's actually our own money. And you know, for what so-called efficiency gains, I don't know, you can get 30% off a digger, can you, Ashley? I doubt it. If you've got a, no. So yeah, so there's, and I guess the other problem, I mean, there's just so many, so we're going to lose control of what our water rates are going to triple. They could, yeah, who knows? We don't know. So no information, lack of information. We've got the best water in the country now. So even if they do put a whole lot of regulations onto it, we're going to be in a pretty good position to actually achieve those. And, you know, I feel like what I've heard, we've got good infrastructure now and we've had good planning and it's been working well. We're spending money. I mean, how would you go spending 50 million every year on water? Ashley, how's that going to go? Because that's what $1 billion, whatever they said it was going to cost in our own area on the dashboard to bring us up to standard was roughly spending around about between 40 and 50 million per annum on water.
It seems incomprehensible.
That's what I
just have a couple of comments, just for clarification. This is just not about water, it's water and sewer and stormwater. And whilst we think we're in a good place with sewer, and we are, we're getting into a better place with water, there is an awful lot of unknown about stormwater and receiving water environments and the costs associated with that. So please don't think for 1 minute that the status quo is where it is okay, because the future is going to be different.
Great, yeah.
And therefore get this research done on those costs that you talked about, how the savings materialise and where the future costs are, so we can understand what others are saying about that.
So could we go back 30 years then and actually look at what our water rates have cost the ratepayer and what it's cost to actually supply that infrastructure? If you can't look forward, look back and see what the history is.
Yeah, but part of it too, and Grant, feel free to join us if you like, because you've got some valuable insights there, obviously. I mean, one of the things is the unknown around the regulatory regime, which, you know, and that's where the costs lie that we don't understand. The issue is that there's a lot of assumptions that have gone into the WICS and the BECA data, et cetera, but we don't know what they are. And so how do we have judgment on those, on the analysis of the numbers when we don't know, because we don't know what the new regulatory regime looks like. So in a perfect world, we'd have that first, so we know what standard we were to meet. But the reality is this is tied up in a 3-year election cycle. So we're not going to have that.
So it would appear that the whole reason for the consolidation of the entities is to get the economies of scale so they can ratchet up the debt to revenue ratio, so they can borrow that money to put the infrastructure in, which means that we ultimately, everyone pays for it. They're just going to increase the price. So I guess is that a good reason to be doing it? And the other thing is giving half of our ownership to a group of people who are self-appointed, and they can have the right to veto anything they don't like. I'm talking about iwi, and that is a concern too. So we know we've already got experience in that area. Another thing I'm concerned about is the information coming to us has only come from DIA, and unfortunately our local government, New Zealand, appear to be aligned with them, and we've been relying on them to give us an independent view. Well, it would appear that they haven't been doing that, and I'm very concerned about that as well.
Yeah, look, in respect to that, there's lots of councils that are working together off to the side. Like I'm meeting with a few of those as well. So I totally agree with your point and the way LGNZ has operated through this. I think we'd all agree that it's far from perfect, and it's been extremely polite. We'll keep the conversation going. So I'll go to now Wayne from Geraldine Community Board.
Yeah, Your Worship, I myself and part of the council are fully aware of how passionate Geraldine is. So I've had a lot of people from the community come to me and express their disgust with 3 Waters, I must add, and are not on board with it at all, and simply the ladies who presented earlier, as I do. Our question is how involved, I realise this is on a really tight time frame, and we won't go into the details of why we suspect that's happening, but is there an intention to consult with the community boards over this, to consult with us, or at least their chairs and deputy chairs, and the decision making we're doing on this line?
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that's the timeframe that we're putting together now. So, and that would include those meetings in specific areas. So it would be community board, and also, we would need to have public meetings in Geraldine, Timaru, Pleasant Point, Temuka at the very least. So, definitely. Yeah.
So, well, the next question they're asking is, the boards will be kept fully informed on your decision or your process that you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, look, and we're literally
excluding public meetings, I'm talking about.
Oh, well, there won't be any public meetings on 3 Waters. Yeah. Oh, sorry, public excluded. Sorry. Yeah. Don't quote me. No public. No, it's all behind closed doors. No, apologies. Sorry, Wayne. Yeah. No, thank you. Go now to Councillor Pillington.
Yeah, look, just follow on Councillor Booth. The worry is we're losing, giving the government $425 million worth of our assets for nothing. You take away the debt and the clickbait of 20 million, but that feed will also affect our terms of borrowing because we drop that income, we don't have the asset. So that may affect lots of projects going forward because we'll only be able to do business as usual, surely.
I can respond briefly to that through you, Your Worship. Yeah, I mean, the issue of what's called stranded overhead and stranded asset is something that a number of councils are alive to in regards to the fact you take out that. And because the idea is that if you look at, say, local government, the local government financing agency, they will allow councils to borrow up to 2.83 times their sort of revenue streams, I think, are the sort of multiples. Now, we set a self-imposed limit quite a bit lower than that. But my understanding is that one of the things they're projecting is that these entities can probably borrow like 4 times that those multiples, rather than say 3 or 2 or whatever, maybe even a bit higher, because they're utilities and they are perceived as having a stronger, more reliable cash flow. So the obvious corollary of all of that is that if you take away your water, you are correct, you are reducing your overall capacity to borrow and fund future activities. So, and a number of councils are very alive, we are as well, and alert to the fact that you will be left with stranded overhead, stranded asset, and what is the cost of running the operation once you eliminate that? And it's likely to be that it will mean that you have less efficiencies inside a council because you're running fewer activities across those smaller bays. So you're quite correct is the short answer.
Thank you, Councillor Pillington. Councillor Lyon.
Thank you, Worship. Look, I agree with everything that's been said, which is really easy to do because I think we all feel that way, but you can't help sitting here thinking, look, Havelock North happened. The reality is there are drinking water standards And you just can't help wondering, why not fix the problems when we're talking about domestic water, just the water itself? Why haven't those standards been enforced on the way through, made sure the infrastructure has been put in from these councils that are now lagging, and not dragging a good performing council like Timaru District into the heap, of the problem? We have been making long-term decisions to keep our drinking water particularly and our sewer pristine as best we can in both fields, and spending the money that ratepayers have allowed us to do. And we're proud of what we've done. So why on earth are we getting involved in this? So it's a mass medication format here, which is really just working to the slowest person, or at least the worst performing council, and dragging us all to that level and beginning at that position. And I think it's slightly insulting and a little bit despicable that this approach is being taken New Zealand-wide. I really think it's not a courteous way of getting the community to go along with an idea and or an advancement. So everybody that I talk to is totally of agreement of what we're saying in the room. It's quite a clear mandate, I would have thought. I mean, you can have public meetings and that'll be fine, but quite simply, we know the answer. The community doesn't want us to be involved in this new entity. So we should and will, I'm sure, do everything we can to not be involved. So, and I applaud what our mayor's doing and the work that Ashley Harbour's doing, and we'll continue on. And there are some things that we may have to do towards the end of it that will make us stand out as a council that won't be shoved around.
Thanks, Councillor Lyon. Clapping is loud. Look, you touched on some really good points. I think, one thing that all councils do agree on is that there's a need for a regulator. And so that's the thing that's been, definitely been missing through the Havelock, going back to the Havelock North issues. We must remember it did kill 5 people and thousands were sick, and there was no regime in there around regulation. The second thing for me is it's the issue is actually funding and financing. Some councils have done this really well, some councils haven't. We need a funding and financing solution, and effectively that's why they've gone to these big entities to borrow to the point that was made before. Broad brush, one size fits all, doesn't always fit our little community that gets hit by centralisation time and time again, does it? But I think, it's still important that we go through the process and do present all the facts, because, when we get audited down the track, and the conversation that we've had with the community needs to be, full and frank, and we've presented everything to them. Look, there is lots of people out there, across the country that thinks this is and should have happened a long time ago. And so there is, there is another view, and, I guess we've reluctantly say we need to keep an open mind. I'll go now to Councillor Burt.
Again, I agree wholeheartedly with what everyone's had to say here today. There's 2 points that I'd like to make. The first one is that the government has absolutely no visibility over all the thousands of little community water drinking catchment schemes. They've said that they want one drinking water standard across the whole of New Zealand, and yet they've only just started dipping into that area. In the South Island, there's only one example of it. They've gone to the Hakataramira catchment scheme there to work out how they're going to get them, as an example, how they're going to build the infrastructure, how they're going to get to them where they need them to the water standards that they're going to hold the rest of the country to. They have no visibility of how it's going to, the cost in relation to those thousands of catchment schemes that also we will have to pay for. And that is something that there is very little visibility in there. The second thing is, in Christchurch after the earthquake, the government came in and poured millions of dollars into it. And one of the things they were doing under the skirt contracts back then was water infrastructure. Very quickly that dried up and those contracts stopped. And if anyone is even still drives around Christchurch, you'll know they barely scratched the surface in repairing the infrastructure in the roads. At the same time as you did the infrastructure, you had to do all the roading, and it was just blowing out. So going forward now with Christchurch and the way it is, and the need to repair that water infrastructure to get that the ability to get the water standards up, who's going to pay for that? Who is going to be the priority among our region or in terms of where that money is going to go to. It's going to go, the bulk of it's going to go to Christchurch. They're in dire straits and they need to do it. Same with Wellington. The big centres are going to get that money and will be the poor cousins like we usually are. And there will be no coalition between what we've done, how well we've done, and where and recognised for that. And will certainly become a backward seat to the bigger entities. Thank you.
Thank you. Go to Councillor Wills, then we'll go Councillor Gilchrist, Councillor Booth, and I'll just ask B to talk to the Productivity Commission report around Three Waters as well. So Councillor Wills.
Okay, thank you, Worship. I think my fellow members have raised some very valid points, which have been all captured, I think, very well. So I just want to make a couple of comments just from a overview. Just the deception and manipulation, I think, from local government, central government has really been ongoing now for a long period of time. We saw it at the rural and provincial meeting, and also just recently more so at the local government conference, that what was going on behind the scenes, the fact that they signed off heads of agreement and various other things without full consultation with all the local councils throughout New Zealand, I think was quite disgusting, to be very honest and open. But also to the scaremongering that's going on, and it was really nice to have our public speakers here today to raise some of the issues and concerns that certainly is out there amongst the community. I think as councillors, most of us are getting it as well from our ratepayers within our district. So to move forward, I think I'm supporting the idea that, yes, it's great to have the consultant engage, get some answers to the questions we have. We go out, we consult with our community, come back with some clear ideas and directions about where we go, because I think moving forward, we've got to make sure that the decisions we make here and today are going to impact on our ratepayers for a very long time into the future. So we've got to make sure that those decisions are very clear and very well informed, so we can actually make sure we are making the right thing for our community and the Timaru district. So that's pretty much what I've got to add at this stage, over and above what's already been spoken about.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Wills. So look, I mean, questions around both consultation and referendum, although they're really valid ones, we don't believe we've got the time to do those proper processes. So we can effectively ask the community, provide a whole lot of information, ask the community, for that feedback to our decision-making processes. So, but we don't believe we have, based on the time frame. If we're looking at the time frame being the 8 weeks, if government were to be open with us now and say, oh, yes, in November you'll have a time period to consult or have a time period to have a referendum. But the thing is, there's so many unknowns, and my fear is if we wait past the end of September, then we won't have an opportunity. So the best process at the moment is to your point, to the discussion that we've had.
But what I am concerned about is just if you can answer this, if possible, Mr. Harper, have we got a time frame when we're going to get a response back from an external consultant?
Yeah, end of April.
Oh, so it is different. It is given a clearer. So it is 31st of August. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I've got that measured here, but then I suppose public consultation and or sharing that information, a plan coming back out about how that's going to be engaged with our broader community, really, I think is more important.
Yeah, no, totally. And so we're pretty much setting the plan now. But unfortunately, we don't believe we're going to be able to have a formal consultation.
That's
or a referendum.
And again, I think that's why the government's got such a strict control around the time limits to limit the opportunity for councils to have that processing. So
it's like a drip trickle feed water scheme, isn't it? Government information. Councillor Gilchrist.
Look, I agree with everything that my fellow councillors have said. I think this idea might be great for some councils, but not this council. I think this is a really great time for us to really stand up to central government and say, this is not what we think is best. I'm really looking forward to getting accurate information that we can take out to our community so that decisions can be based on fact, because I know this is something where it'd be really easy to go with your heart rather than your head. So I'm really looking forward to having the accurate information, but I think it'd be really important that we stand up and stick up for ourselves, even though we're little.
Not little, we're 1%. We're the one and everyone else is below us.
Well, it's even better that we've got to be scripted.
Go now, Councillor Booth, and then I'll go to Jen. Thanks.
Just commenting on Councillor Lyons talking about the reasons for this coming up around the water issues in the North Island. The part of the barrier the Ferries Weir review, which their scope, they were given the scope, how they could comment from the DIA, and they weren't allowed to see how they'd come about the numbers. But saying that, the counterfactual was actually a water authority being implemented, and that should have been the first thing in the first place that you would expect them to go to actually beef up after you have issues like that, to ensure that the infrastructure is up to a standard. And that is what it's as if they suggested that ultimately the DIA were the very minimum they wanted the water authority to be pushed through, but the ultimate was to consolidate all the entities into one or four groups, and bigger is better. So I guess the last thing is the Castalia report, where the LGNZ got that it was negative, and so they didn't show it to anyone. So that was just an absolute shocker from my point of view. They were happy to show the Becker and the other reports, and which the scope was designated by the DIA. But when the LGNZ went out to get an independent report, they didn't like what they seen, and so they buried it. So very concerning.
Thanks, Councillor Booth. And a question on Zoom recently was, have other considerations been made, and supposedly DIA have looked at 16 to 24 other options, and supposedly that information's been provided as well, but I certainly haven't seen it, but they got discounted. And so supposedly Local Government New Zealand is providing us with that information. Go now to Jan, thanks.
Thank you. The local communities don't want it. It's creaking infrastructure that leads to, Wellington doesn't need a water feature, right? Because they keep just turning up spontaneously. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons in the stormwater, all of those things, and all of them to nobble all of those issues, achievable by different means, regulatory, as you said. I think it's very much a sledgehammer to backing up scenario. It seems ham-fisted to me, and I think it would be worth this district actually addressing the issue, at least to some extent, and that means it's like, what are you trying to achieve here? There must surely be better ways to do that.
Yeah, look, and those questions have been asked at Rural Provincial that have been privy to many times by mayors, and effectively you could tell early on there was a preferred predetermined option, which I think is the one they're heading towards, and maybe not predetermined in the fact that it was going to be 4 entities. It could have been 1 or 2, it could have been 9, but it was aggregation of some description, and nothing else has been considered. I'll just get the Chief Executive to speak just briefly to the Productivity Commission report, and then we'll go to Councillor Wills.
Thank you, Your Worship. So look, in November or December 2019, the Productivity Commission released its budget and financing report, and it's a chapter 11 on 3 waters and how to address it. And they don't pull any punches about the need for the improvement of water across parts of the country, and that there are financial challenges. But what they do highlight is that having a really strong regulatory framework is important, and I think most of us would agree that the introduction of the regulated very clear frameworks is helpful, because it then gives everybody a very clear objective about what are the standards and how to meet them. But what they do highlight is the need for councils to actually work themselves either in conjunction with their own with their neighbouring councils or with other councils, but for each council to come and look at what is the optimal outcome for it, and that those who meet the standards and who, in terms of what the regulations are, should be left to do it themselves. And the reason they're saying, they're advocating for that evolutionary approach, if you like, is that it will constrain the fiscal costs, but it will ensure that standards are met and there are incentives for them to be met. And that they advocate that the government then doesn't have to be unnecessarily involved in that, and in doing that, it will enable a better outcome for communities, while at the same time ensuring that the water regulations and the standards are met. And so that's the position. It's quite a nice, concise summary. I suppose it's probably, I don't know, do you recall? Actually, it's probably 20 or 30 pages, is it?
It may be only
15.
It was on the hub.
Yes, it is on the hub, but if it's in the, but it's a good summary of the background to the issues, the framing of the importance of regulation, and that in actual fact, there is an alternative way forward where councils should be charged first and foremost with being given the opportunity to in actual fact direct and to remedy and come and bring their own water reticulation and standards where they are not, let's emphasize that, up to standard. So it's a good summary of it, but it does advocate a somewhat different approach, Your Worship, than what has been advocated through, if you like, the WICS model. Yeah.
Councillor Wills.
Well, thank you. It's just interesting because it's such a polarising subject. And look, I spoke to one of our colleagues as a councillor up from Lower Hutt last week to see where they are sitting with this whole subject as well. They're quite the opposite to us. They're embracing it. They see it's a real opportunity for improving their water standards and quality and everything else. So they're absolutely taking it on board and accepting everything the government wants to throw at them. So it's great to have this discussion today, and I'll be loving to be a fly on the wall up in their environment to listen to some of their debate and discussion moving forward as well. But again, it's such a polarising subject that I think we're going to have such a diverse range of views right throughout New Zealand. So it'll be interesting to see where we're all heading in the end of the 8 weeks.
Yeah, you are right. And there's councils that have underinvested, and there's also high growth councils who probably can't fund the growth. So that, you know, there again, it becomes funding and financing and regulation versus, you know, what we perceive to be a reform issue. Perhaps Councillor Burt.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to, so we needed some context to that, and you've just enabled it to, it's either high growth or they've completely underfunded, and they know going forward that they're one of those outliers who just will need government to fund everything they need to get to where they're at.
Yeah, look, if government came and presented a funding model such as, and I know they've discounted this model, but such as the, you know, Waka Kotahi model, which is, you know, funded through both Waka Kotahi and council, co-funding model, then I think they would jump at it and they wouldn't be looking to give their assets away quite so quickly. But they're in a position whereby this is a solution, you know, to fix their issues. Councillor Oliver.
Yeah, that's probably more about the process. Just there's a bit of confusion out there amongst the rural farmers and some of those people about what's actually in this whole, what's happening within this. I guess you'd say it's a bit of it's not really a debate, but a takeover. And they're a bit confused about their water and stuff like that. I'm glad that we've actually started talking about front footing some of the discussions deeper into our communities and stuff like that. I think that really needs to be happening. Question I have is, you know, when will we have enough information to be able to start these, you know, being able to start to go out to our communities and start talking to them about this?
Yeah, great question. I don't think we're ever going to have enough information. So at some point, we're just going to have to go and do it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, each week I think, oh, you know, we're going to have more, we're going to have enough. Well, at some point, you know, I know Waimeti had a public meeting yesterday, which was last night, I think, which was well attended, which is great. And they've presented information, but we as a council have to be comfortable that we're presenting enough to them. Just another point that we do have to provide, sorry, to your point around rural, I had the, you know, someone in a farming capacity as well contact me around what does that mean for the likes of Opua, the dam, those sorts of things. And totally explain that, but there's lots of information that people don't have answers for, and specific to our, own water. So their information, there's answers that we need to provide in an easily accessible form. Mr. Harper, and then we'll go to.
Or there is vacuums of information.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is, the poor one. There's a vacuum there.
Yeah.
We have briefed our comms man today on that, and he's over the next couple of 3 days putting together a plan. We don't have to wait till 31 August to do stuff. We can plan for it when we have the framework set up, and then when we get the information, we just populate it and go and do stuff. So
yeah, so we'll be able to
on foot.
Yeah, so fairly soon we'll be able to come out with dates and start. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And look, and we'll at the day that we have a public meeting, we'll have as much information as is available to us on that date, and go from there. Councillor Booth, and then we'll look to wrap up.
Just to Councillor Oliver, there's actually the document that came out just that Ashley sent around just recently has got a lot of information in it, and you can actually go into our Part 4 area, and you'll see all the supporting reports, except for probably the custodian one, and also costs and there's a dashboard there and everything. So it would be nice actually that we could get the information in a summarised form too. I'm just a bit concerned about getting 100 pages and expecting to read that report and understand it. So it would be quite good if perhaps our officials could actually give us an executive summary of the report instead of all of us trying to understand a lot of stuff we don't know a lot about. But anyway.
Yeah, it's a bit of a balance. I think there is an onus on us to do a bit more reading than the average ratepayer.
And your worship, I don't want to be put in a position where I'm editing stuff out and then be accused of leaving stuff out that you really want to see. It's a fine line.
I think what we do need to do, though, as far as the public portal, information is all there for those that want to do all that reading, but the likes of executive summaries are easily accessible as well, and across all the reports. Yeah. Cool. So any other further discussions? It's clear as mud. No, not too bad. We've got a pathway, so that's great. Thanks, Mr. Harper. So we'll move on now. Public forum's all done, so nothing to consider. I think we've had a good conversation around Three Waters, so we're now moving to confirm tenders minutes and public excluded. So, and thanks again, ladies, for attending. Appreciate that. Will be 2 minutes, 5 minutes. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
How much time do you need to consultation?
Oh, full consultation.
Oh, so if it's
Yeah.
I can answer that.
Yeah.
So if it's under the statutory, the special consultative process, like for the long-term plan, you've got to allow 1 month. So, but we probably would be doing. Yeah, you're looking at. Yeah. So the consultation won't be following the special consultative process here if we're going to make a decision by the end of September. But that doesn't stop council consulting in different ways to get feedback from members of the community.
It doesn't stop the people petitioning the government to back off to give us time to consult.
No, totally. Yeah. Look, I think the process that we'll run will be we'll still get views from the community, and at a point in time with the information that's provided. And the problem with a full consultation, when we get audited later on, if we haven't produced everything, and we don't know when we're going to be in a position to do that, and when we are in a position to do that, it's possibly too late. So I think the approach that we're going to have is around talking to the community with as much information as we can provide. Then that's probably as best as we're possibly going to get. But I think it'll serve the same purpose. Yeah. Yeah, no, totally. You look, and there's been a lot of question around pushback at from mayors, and we've just got a resounding no from central government. Yeah, but Thank you. Sorry, so be to move us to public excluded, Councillor Gilchrist.